Service Channel Live. Hak Sameach, happy feast. We were waiting on both green lights. It looks like we've got them. So welcome to those of you watching live on Facebook Live and to those of you watching live on the YouTube Live Sabbath Service Channel. Welcome to the 5th day of the Feast of Tabernacles 2020. This is the, let's see, 19th day of the 7th month already? Yeah, let's see. We start the Feast of Tabernacles on the 15th day of the 7th month on God's holy sacred calendar. And if we're at the 5th day already, we have, well, let's see, 5th day, so the first day is the 15th, 16th, 17th, 18th, 19th. Yeah, 19th day of the 7th month on God's holy sacred calendar. We're yesterday at the 3.5 day point, we were halfway through the feast. That meant symbolically we were halfway through the millennium, about 500 years into the millennium. At the completion of yesterday, and now the start of today, and a half a day into it, so at about 4.5 days. Today's the 5th day, but we're only about 4.5 days at this early moment of the day into the Feast of Tabernacles. That means we're a little more than 143 years per day. So we are we're a little ways more than 600 years into the millennium. We're heading towards 700 and some odd years into the millennium by the end of today. And so we got 300 more years to go, plus half of today, plus 2 more days of the feast to go. Thursday and Friday. Friday at sunset begins the last great day. The Feast of Tabernacles will be over Friday night when the Sabbath starts, the regular weekly Sabbath starts. It will then be the last great day. Just as a point of reference, we're October 7, 2020 on the pagan Roman calendar. Today, brethren, after we sing a few hymns together, we're going to go to a very special behind-the-work feast film from 1982. You'll see Mr. Armstrong fly around on his symbolic 2 wings of a great eagle, so to speak. You know, that symbolism in Revelation, we understand that pretty much to mean modern jet aircraft. And in 1982, Mr. Armstrong still had 3 more years he would use the Gulfstream G2, the G2, before he got the G3 that we saw him acquire in the 1985 feast film we showed the last couple of days. We split it up. He got that on August 19, 1985. Until then, he's still flying around. He put over 3 million miles on the G2. You'll see him fly around in that to different places during today's feast film, 1982. But let's begin, as I said, where we all participate together. We begin with some hymns, and let's sing together from page 12 in the purple hymnal. It would be Psalm 12, from Psalm 12, a hymn that's entitled, Thy Word Eternal is Truth Evermore. We'll get the lower third out of the way, and I'm going to lead the hymns with you. And on this one, I have to sing along. I think you've noticed we haven't had any mic problems yet. I took the wiring apart yesterday, went through the entire wiring, and I think I found the problem and have it fixed. We'll find out if and I tested for a while, and we had no problems yesterday, so I think I found the problem. We wired around something, and I'm hoping that's it, so that we don't have that audio drop out right in the middle of my trying to say something to you like it did the last couple of days. I had to go through yesterday's live stream and edit out all the places where the audio dropped out for over a minute or 2, and I just chopped that out of the video and reloaded those videos up onto YouTube. And where else do we put them? On YouTube and on Facebook Live. Oh yeah, we reloaded it on Facebook Live, and we reloaded one on Vimeo where we'd had the original that had all those audio dropouts. We fixed that yesterday, so in the archive, when you go to our website at cogtv.org, click the archive menu selection, you'll now get versions of the audio that don't have all that disappearing audio as it drops low and drops out. Okay, let's sing together. Psalm 12, Thy word eternal is truth evermore. Let's all sing together, beginning with verse 1. Hey, I'm sorry, I forgot. I told you that that this one would not have the chorale with it, and that I'll have to lead this one. So let me back it up, start it again. It caught me off guard that this one, I noticed as it started, said the timing is 3/4 timing, so that'll be a little different waving of the arm. Let's all sing together, beginning on verse 1 as it comes up here. Help us, O God, for the merciful seas. Faithfulness fails, wicked men have their way. They all speak lies, all with double heart speak. God shall cut off all those who speak boastfully. Verse 2, poor men are crushed, and the needy have sighed. God will arise, their deliverer shall be. He'll set them safe, for his promise is pure. Thy word eternal is truth evermore. Verse 3, men's words are false, they are empty and vain. Each other's lies to his neighbor he boasts. They put their trust in their flattering speech. Exalted are they among sons of men. All right, brethren, thank you to those of you who sang along on one I had to lead in 3/4 time, and had to sing along because we don't have the chorale backing up that one, and we don't have the chorale backing up this one, but I wanted us to do some new hymns today that we haven't done during the feast this year so far. That was one. Here's another from Psalm 11. Let's all sing together. His eyes behold the children of men. Another 3/4 timing, everybody together on verse 1. The eternal I put all my trust. How can you say to a mountain escape? Flee like a bird from the peril in haste. See how the wicked aim with their bow. Furtively shoot at the upright in heart. Impious men who wait in the dark. Verse 2, when the foundations are falling apart, what can the righteous man do in his plight? Ah, the eternal is there on his throne. His eyes behold the children of men, testing and proving the righteous in heart, requiting evil, violent men. Verse 3, soon the eternal shall send from above fire, hell, and brimstone, and scorching hot winds. This is the portion of their cup to be, for the eternal loves righteous deeds. Those who are upright shall look on his face. He looks on them and favor impart. hearts. All right, brethren, thank you again for those of you who sang along with that. Our microphone's holding up. I'm happy to report to you. And we're going to save one and sing at the end. Let's go ahead and get to this 1982 feast film with God's end-time apostle, Herbert W. Armstrong, Behind the Work.
Another year in the work. More leaders seen. More magazines printed. More TV programs taped. New ministers ordained. New church members. New spiritual understanding. One more year of progress in the end-time work of God. It began over 50 years ago when God called Herbert W. Armstrong and his wife Lola. The work that became the Worldwide Church of God started small. A handful of co-workers supported Mr. and Mrs. Armstrong while the world was in the grips of the Great Depression. First office was one tiny room in the Hampton Building in Eugene, Oregon. In his autobiography, Mr. Armstrong tells how he set up that first office of the work. It was an inner room without windows for ventilation. There were 2 or 3 old tables in this room. These were used as office desks and tables for printing, folding, and mailing the mimeographed Plain Truth. For filing cabinets, we went to a grocery store and asked for some cardboard cartons. The ones they gave me apparently contained bottles of whiskey, since they had big whiskey labels printed on the sides. I pasted plain wrapping paper around the outside to conceal these labels. But the work grew. Today, each of those cardboard boxes has become a major department, employing dozens of people. From one tiny room, the work now has offices around the world in many different countries. And from a handful of co-workers, God has called tens of thousands of people to support and help Mr. Armstrong as God leads him to ever-increasing opportunities to fulfill the end-time commission. Modern technology in the hands of trained and educated people can magnify the work of one man until Christ's apostle today can now reach more people than 1,000 could in the days of the New Testament church. Mr. Armstrong travels abroad several times a year in the Grumman Gulf Stream too, visiting leaders of government and the offices and churches of the work in many different countries. and maintaining personal contact with thousands of Plain Truth readers through lectures and meetings. And from his office in Pasadena, he keeps in constant contact with the men who supervise the many departments that support him. Managing editor Dexter Faulkner reviews the latest issues of the Works publications with Mr. Armstrong.
Got several things to show you today. Some good things, I hope. This is the latest Plain Truth. Just came off the press, the advanced copies. This is the newsstand copy with your semi-annual letter in it.
Oh, I see. That's just hooked in.
Right. And then this envelope goes with it. Right.
Good.
I was surprised on the next page of the various...
Eye-opening proof. Evolution did not occur. Yeah, that's very good. I'm glad to see that.
How many?
Well, that's in this latest number.
And this is the latest issue of Youth 82. I thought maybe you'd like to look at that.
Oh, good. Now that's good.
Nice and cheery, clean-cut young people.
Very good. Is there a hidden enemy in your home?
Yes, that's an article. That's one of your articles.
Mr. Armstrong is concerned not only about the content, but also the appearance of each of the Works publications. His early training in advertising taught him that if the printed word was to do its job, a strong message was not enough. The material must be well presented, with careful selection of type style and proper use of space to grab the reader's attention and make him want to read on. The expertise he gained in advertising was put to use in God's work, first with the Plain Truth and then the Good News. Youth 82 is the newest of the Works publications. Now in its second year of publication, its editorial staff follow the successful formula established by the Plain Truth and the Good News. Clear, well-written articles and an attractive, clean, and uncluttered appearance. They know that it takes careful attention to detail to produce an outstanding magazine.
Mom, why are you crying? Is anybody watching me? Good. He got away with it. Why can't I? Good. They need to have some teaching on that line. Well, this magazine,
I wanted
very much interested in. That's coming along fine. Now, what
wanted to get your approval on this cover idea for the. This is the Feast issue of the Good News.
Very good. That's the Good News.
That's the Good News. I brought you some manuscripts to go over. I've given those to Mr. Dean.
Plain Truth cover yet?
No, not yet. I should have that probably in another few days.
That's good. Very good.
Good. Appreciate your time.
Dexter.
Thank you, sir.
In the 1930s, when the work was small, Mr. and Mrs. Armstrong could personally write receipts for the tithes and offerings sent in by the handful of loyal members and co-workers. But now God has added many additional thousands to support a worldwide work. The day-to-day financial affairs are supervised by Treasurer Leroy Neff.
How's everything in your department?
Well, it's going quite well, sir. We would hope that it would do a little better, of course, financially. But, you know, it sort of goes up and down a little bit.
Well, there's just one way to make it come in better. If we please Christ more, he will reward us.
Yes, sir.
Send it in.
Yes, sir.
And you got a report.
I have here a chart, Mr. Armstrong. This is the total male income for the past quite a few years. You see, here are the dollars here, and this is based on a month, from $1 million up till $8 million. And it shows the members, the co-workers, and the donors, how much they have given during that time, month by month. And you see the general trend of the membership is very good here. It's increasing overall. But
but I don't like that so well.
That's right. The trend for the donors and co-workers has been more or less flat. Just a slight upturn.
Well, one reason for that, I'll tell you, we don't need to be so discouraged. One reason for that some of the ministers have been explaining to me is that they're having more requests for counseling, for baptism, and many co-workers are now becoming members. So they're not called co-workers any longer. They're now called members.
Yes, sir. Now, this is the same information, only showing it by percentages. So you see, the members are taking the lion's share of the load here from
Let me see.
about 75% more or
Black
less.
is members, red is co-workers.
And then the green is the donors again. You see, at the start of the period, the members were giving about 60% of the income. And now it's
Now,
more
the
like
members are
75
giving
or so.
a lot bigger percent of the income.
That's
I
right.
see.
That's
I
right.
see.
Well, I thought maybe you might like to see them.
Oh, good. Thanks a million.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Armstrong learned years ago that giving is God's way. When the Ambassador Auditorium was completed, Mr. Armstrong wanted a way to share it, not only with the college students and church members, but also with the local community. And so began the popular concert series, in which some of the world's greatest artists perform. Managing director of the auditorium, Ellis LaRavia, reports to Mr. Armstrong on the new season.
Now, what's new in your department?
Well, I was just wanted to show you, I don't think you've seen our new brochure that's just been completed for the auditorium for the 1982-83 season.
I think I saw the cover. And
Did you see the cover?
To get
Yes,
through it.
right. I think it's going to be an outstanding season again. But we have over 80 major concerts this season.
Boy, that looks like a great year.
That's a stellar year, I think.
In what I think is, and I think many of the world's greatest artists will agree with me,
Right, right.
finest auditorium
That's
on
On the
Earth.
face of the earth.
By the way, how are they coming now on the addition to the
The Student Center?
Student Center.
Coming very fine. We're hoping to basically have it finished by the feast.
Mr. LaRavia also reports to Mr. Armstrong on all aspects of the condition and maintenance of the many buildings and properties owned by the church and the college. Mr. Armstrong continues, as he has always done, to take a keen and personal interest in the development and appearance of the Pasadena campus.
The beams, these beams that are coming out here, 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 and here, all supported directly right off the wall.
Oh, I see. They will actually tie into the wall.
Yes, we'll tie into the wall. We have plates that are going right into the wall, in angles. They're going into the wall, and the beams slide in, and we bolt right to that. We will not have a ledger along the wall.
Yeah.
In other words.
I've been pleased with the way the finish,
John
stucco
Lyon's done
finish
a
is.
beautiful job
Yeah.
on that, yes.
Well, I think we're very blessed to have the men we have here working on these projects, because what a difference that makes.
We do have dedicated people,
Yeah,
and we do
right.
have some pretty good craftsmen.
Every aspect of Ambassador College must set the highest standard of excellence and beauty. Mr. Armstrong has never compromised with quality. Several times the campus has won awards for the most beautifully landscaped college in America. The quality of Ambassador College must also be reflected in its students and faculty. Maintaining the physical, cultural, and spiritual environment that makes Ambassador unique as a place of education has always been one of Mr. Armstrong's highest priorities. Deputy Chancellor Raymond McNair confers regularly with Mr. Armstrong on all matters relating to the administration and academic program of the college at Pasadena.
You know, I hope all of our people in the college understand the real purpose of Ambassador College. And I think a lot of people don't understand that, and I wonder if the members all do. This is not just another college. Never was intended to be. The only purpose of Ambassador College is to recruit people to be trained for the work of God.
Yes, sir. In our recent survey that we conducted a year ago, an alumni survey, if I recall, 35% of all the graduates of the three campuses that are still active members in the church, 35% of them are now employed in the work, either in the ministry or as wives of the ministers or in the offices around the world or, of course, here at headquarters.
From the time Mr. Armstrong began his ministry, his preaching bore fruit. Some who heard understood and were converted. Small churches were started. While Mr. Armstrong pastored these churches personally, everything went well. But as more members were added, and as the needs of the growing work took more of his time, Mr. Armstrong knew that he would have to have more ministers to help him. And yet he could not rely on ministers who had received their education from the colleges of the world. He would have to train them himself. And so, in 1947, Ambassador College began, with just 4 students. But college enrollment grew. As students matured, they were able to assist in the teaching, instructing others in the things that they had learned. And when the pioneer students graduated, some were ordained and sent out to pastor the congregations of what was then the Radio Church of God. Today, some of those pioneer ministers teach to the students of Ambassador College the things they learned from Christ's apostle.
What the gospel was. Why did God send the gospel? Well, it was sent so that the peoples of this earth could hear a warning message about what God said was going to happen, and so that God could also use the gospel as a vehicle or a means by and through which His church would announce that news to the world, and God would thereby call out of the world those that God had chosen, those that God had predestined to be called at this time, so that they could develop the character, they could grow and overcome, and eventually inherit the kingdom of God and serve as part of the very family of God in the kingdom of God to rule over the nations of this earth under Christ at His second coming. Now we come to
the older men, after many years of teaching and preaching, are well equipped to pass on their experience to their students.
The Holy Spirit comes into one after we start that process of real repentance. And that process, of course, must continue on. And that's a very, very important principle, how the Holy Spirit does continue on and work with us and help us to continue growing. Jesus shows, of course, that with that Holy Spirit we will change, we will grow. He says in John 14 and verse 26, the Comforter, which is the Holy Spirit.
Students are encouraged to make the most of the ambassador training and prepare themselves for the work yet to be done.
Well, I've enjoyed working with all of you this year, for sure, and I've never had a better group of men than we have this year. And you look back and see the years of trial we've been through and the stability of the churches, and a great deal of that's probably because of men like you and ladies like you that have gone through Ambassador College and graduated and gone out into an area and made full proof of your experience and training and your opportunity here. So let's not let down now and fail to do our job that we need to do after we graduate.
Since the earliest years of the college in Pasadena, the commencement exercises have traditionally been held in the lower gardens behind the library. And now Chancellor Armstrong addresses the graduating seniors, the class of 1982.
Educators and scientists have been saying, give us sufficient knowledge and we will solve all of the world's problems and we'll eradicate all of the world's evils. We've been increasing in knowledge. The world's fund of knowledge doubled in the decade of the 1960s, but unfortunately the world's troubles doubled also, because the knowledge produced was not the type of knowledge that cured the evils. The education of the future, I will say this: education will begin in the home and in the cradle. Parents will have to learn first how to teach infants in the first months of their lives. I think there will be education in classrooms in the world tomorrow. And I think we're on the track here at Ambassador College of the kind of education it will be. But I think it will be refined and improved very greatly over what we have been able to do here. We have done the best that God has revealed to us as far as He's seen fit to reveal and as far as we have seen. And we're sending this graduating class out into the world And as Christ said, they are the light of the world, and that they should let their light shine, that others may see their good works. God help us then to have love, and to let our light shine, to be good citizens, to be good neighbors toward other people. I just say, God help us, and He will. The Church of God is different than any other church in the world. That's where the college plays a part in it. Jesus didn't start to try to just convert the whole world, but He called 12 disciples, and a disciple is a student. Now, He taught and trained them so they could be teachers. Now, we're carrying on that same program here, and Ambassador College is simply a college to train teachers. We train ministers, and ministers are teachers to teach their congregations. And their congregations are students to learn the spiritual knowledge of God,
yes,
which is altogether different than what Adam rejected and what this world does not teach, and none of the universities or colleges of the world. Spiritual knowledge.
Ambassador College offers young men and women unique opportunities. In conjunction with the Jordanian royal family, Mr. Armstrong is planning to send qualified ambassador students to assist in the training of teachers who will instruct handicapped children at the Bunyat Special Educational Center near Amman.
So through the foundation, we're interested in that program, and in what they want over there is some people that are already trained here by us to train teachers to speak their language over there, to be teachers in the school for their handicapped children. They're quite concerned that we're interested enough to help them along and send people over to teach teachers. They can't carry on the school without teachers. You know, that's the thing I've been bringing up in the church here.
Well, I believe, Mr. Armstrong, that the students, with the proper training and perhaps one or two other classes that could be instituted or approved here at Ambassador by yourself, I believe the students could serve very effectively in this area.
Well, Raymond, did you ever stop to think how that applies when Jesus said it's more blessed to give than receive? Now, we get in to give, and we teach, and we get, and those who are helping and serving are getting more out of it than the ones that are served.
Sure.
The one who gives gets more out of it than the one who receives. And people in the world don't understand that.
Mr. Armstrong shows a personal interest in Ambassador's other campus in Big Sandy. Although the two sister campuses are 1,500 miles apart, that distance is easily bridged with the G2, which can land at the airstrip right on the campus grounds. In August, Mr. Armstrong flew to Big Sandy for the opening of the new academic year and for an update on the college's progress from Deputy Chancellor Les McCullough.
Well, I wanted to take an opportunity to go ahead and catch you up a little bit and give you some information on where the college is and what we have for this coming year. The freshman class this year, we had 434 applications that were requested directly from Big Sandy. There were other applications that were sent to Pasadena, but 434 were sent directly to Big Sandy.
Come here.
Yes.
Good.
Out of that, we accepted 174, which is about 40% of the total applications that were requested were accepted. So we were only able to take about 40% of those
I see.
who originally requested to come.
Now, when we reopened here, it was partly because the work is picking up and growing and expanding, and we do now begin to need more. And partly because we had so many applying, and they were church families, and we couldn't accept them, only a fraction of them.
Right.
And so many students wrote in, well, what do you advise? What can I do? So partly we opened it up to just accommodate members of church families to help them get the right kind of education. And then partly we felt that we would be now accepting more students than we're going to employ. But even after 2 years of training, they will go back and be leaders in their local churches.
Oh, yes. I think you were aware of the fact that the Texas Coordinating Board issues a license for the college to function and give the degrees and everything. They were here in May and were very impressed.
Good.
They were very impressed with the facilities. They were very impressed with the faculty.
Good.
And they made their recommendation in July to the other board. And my understanding from those who were there at the meeting was that they made a very strong recommendation that they felt the college was doing exactly what it said it would do, and that the facilities and the staff were very highest quality and caliber. So it seems like it's getting off to a very good start.
Everything sounds good. And I think we're going to have a good year this year.
Well, we'll do our best to make it that way.
What time is the faculty reception?
7:30.
7:30. Well, good evening, everybody. And welcome to Ambassador College. All you wonderful freshmen. I've learned, I would say, more this last year since I spoke to the first new group of freshmen here last year than I think I've learned in any other 1 year. And I'm learning more now at 90 than I was learning when I was 18 or 20 or 16 or whatever. Now we keep on learning. If we're willing, we should. And you see, learning and education is a lifelong process. Well, you have come to a college that is God's college. A college that has, you've come to a college that is going to try to start you on the right track. The track that will lead to life. The track that will lead to peace in the world. Now, there's no college on earth like Ambassador College. Only one like it, but there are 2 campuses. Now, you've come to a beautiful campus. It's out in nature, all the beautiful woods, the lakes down here. And I was looking out as I was getting dressed to come over here tonight, and out the window I could see the sun setting out over the lake. And a setting sun over the lake, it's a beautiful sight. Just beautiful. And there are a lot of beautiful things to see here on this campus. But look, the things that you can get spiritually in your mind someday when you are made immortal and you become God yourself will be so far greater than anything you've ever sensed, ever seen, or heard, or smelled, or tasted, or felt, that you can't dream of it now. It is just going to be super wonderful. And here's the start, right here at Ambassador College. You've come to a wonderful place. Make the most of it, everybody. Thanks a lot.
The end-time apostle has a commitment not only to the college students, but to all the youth in the church. He tries to schedule a visit to each of the sessions of the summer educational program at Orr, Minnesota. After an enthusiastic welcome, Mr. Armstrong visited one of the dormitories with YOU Director Kevin Dean.
Good morning. All eyes attention.
We've got the best beds in camp.
Well, we have lots of letters from mothers who say that when their daughters come home from this camp, they're amazed. Their daughters never made a bed before, and they never washed dishes, and now they just get out and do it and don't have to be told.
Oh, Mr. Armstrong. Welcome to the canoeing area.
Excuse me, could you move? They're learning all the parts of the canoe. Go ahead with the class.
Okay. Okay, girls, let's go over once again what this is called. Ready? What's this called? Grip. What's this called? Shaft. The throat. The blade. The tip. Okay. Steer.
Come on, Diane.
Gets more momentum on it.
This goes real fast.
They do.
All right. Go on, Diane. Okay.
Before leaving the summer camp, he always takes time to talk with the campers and staff in the gymnasium.
Well, greetings, young pioneers. I might say young ambassadors. And all the staff and all the faculty. Have you been learning anything here so far? Well, let me remind you that when you were born, you didn't know anything. And you began to learn. You were born with a mind that was capable of receiving a lot of knowledge and coming to know a lot of things, but it didn't know anything yet. It was a mind unfilled with knowledge. I would like you to know something about who and what you are and what lies ahead for you, what opportunities or what is going to happen to you a year, 5 years, 10 years from now. Where will you be 10 years? Where will you be 20 years or 100 years from now? You need to think about that a little bit. You never stop learning. So many people think education is something you go to school and get an education and you don't learn anymore. Oh, poppycock. You have to keep learning as long as you live. And all of you young people are called, and you have that chance. And the people of the world, you young children are different from the people in the world, in that God has made it possible for you to come to Him. And Jesus said, no man can come to me except the Father which sent me draws him, but the Father is drawing all of you. Think of that. I want to leave that message with you.
In the years since the first congregation met at the Jeans Schoolhouse, the church has grown many times over. In the United States alone, there are today nearly 400 congregations. The many details of coordinating the churches are supervised by the Ministerial Services Office. Here, a small staff distributes materials to the field ministers and assists them in the 1,001 details that go into maintaining a local church. The Ministerial Services team analyzes the big picture, coordinating the planning of Bible studies and churches. Directing the Ministerial Services Office is Mr. Joe Tkach. Mr. Tkach reports regularly to Mr. Armstrong on all matters relating to the churches and their pastors.
How are things going in the ministry?
Oh, just fine, as well as could be expected. That's what I wanted to talk about this morning here with you. Wanted to cover the men who are presently in on the 8th refreshing program.
Mr. Tkach coordinates the ministerial refreshing program. About 35 ministers and their wives travel to Pasadena for each 2-week session.
Well, I'll tell you, one of the most important things in the work are these refresher courses for the ministers.
Right.
Get them in here. I get wonderful reports, and I only get to go over and talk to them for a couple of hours. And, you know, in the field of medicine, if a doctor doesn't keep up with his medical journals and new medical knowledge and all that sort of thing, he's outnumbered and just a thing of the past inside of 5 years.
That's true.
Well, it's the same way in God's work and in the ministry.
The refresher program has proved invaluable in helping the ministry to speak with one voice, so that the church worldwide can grow in unity. While at Pasadena, they are also updated on all aspects of the growth and progress of the work worldwide. Mr. Armstrong takes one afternoon of each session to speak with the ministers personally.
In the Great Commission, Jesus said, "Go ye therefore, all power has been given to me in heaven and in earth. Go ye therefore and teach all nations, baptizing them into the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all things whatsoever I've commanded you." To observe, that means to do. It's a way of life. And what did he command them? The law of God. Think not I've come to destroy the law. I've kept my Father's commandments. You go and teach them to do what I've commanded you. Today God had me, and through me raised up Ambassador College. And out of one of the 3 campuses of Ambassador College, most of you have come to teach you, to go out, and you are now teaching the people under you. And they are studying under you just as the apostles studied under Christ. And they themselves are going to have to teach in the millennium.
The refresher program reminds the ministry of the seriousness of their calling and the importance of the churches in their care. From information sent in by the ministers around the world, the Ministerial Services staff compiles reports to maintain an accurate picture of the growth and progress of the congregations wherever they may be.
Well, we have some of the statistics right here.
This is good. I'm glad to see this report.
Yes, it gives a
375 churches in the United States, Canada,
68 churches. That's just in the English
in
speaking.
the English language, 68 churches, and the French language, 6 churches.
Right.
In Canada.
And in Australia, you have
Australia,
42.
42. The Philippines, 29 different churches. By the way, I just had a long-distance call from Mr. Waterhouse, and he's going to be here in a couple of weeks. And he tells me that in all the church, he's visiting a different church every day, just about 7 days a week. And he says that the PMs, that is, prospective member requests, are coming in, and the ministers everywhere are interviewing more people that are interested in talking about baptism.
Unlike most ministers who are assigned to pastor 1 or 2 congregations for several years, Mr. Gerald Waterhouse travels many thousands of miles each year, visiting the local congregations. Mr. Waterhouse is a well-known figure to ministers and brethren in all parts of the world. His long experience and unique responsibility in the work make his visits eagerly anticipated by ministers and brethren alike.
It's very nice to have Mr. Waterhouse back with us this afternoon. And just to bring you up to date on his travels and where he has been and where he's going, he is on his 7th world tour. And this is the 313th church that he has covered in this tour. He's going to complete his tour in Southern California, and then he'll be traveling on up to the Canadian area. And when he finishes covering the Canadian churches, he will be going on over to our overseas offices. And so at this time, I would like to present to you Mr. Gerald Waterhouse.
Well, greetings to all of you, brethren. Good to be here.
In his sermons and Bible studies, Gerald Waterhouse always encourages the local congregations to see the big picture and to stay loyally in support of Mr. Armstrong and the end-time work of God.
In other words, God had to make possible a worldwide work through one man to build a team from the worldwide makeup of humanity, and then put them through a process of final training until they become one. Then through them he deals with the rest of mankind and the future generations, and finally prepares to resurrect the rest of the dead and bring them into the family of God.
Mr. Armstrong travels overseas several times a year, visiting heads of state of many nations and speaking before large groups of readers of the plain truth.
God's way is to have as much concern for the good and the welfare of everybody else as you do for your own self.
In February 1982, Mr. Armstrong visited the office in Manila, seeing for himself the day-to-day operation of the work in the Philippines. He also spoke to overflow crowds during a 2-night campaign at the Philippine International Convention Center. Now, a few months later, Regional Director Guy Ames updates Mr. Armstrong on the results of his Far East trip.
The latest campaign that you had over there is bringing the most positive results of any campaign you've had there in the past.
Have you really had good results?
Yes. It was the most powerful message that you've given to the public ever. Just really tremendous and powerful, and it was a real sermon loaded with scriptures, and it has been bringing in some good results.
I am a voice crying out in the wilderness, the Babylon of religious confusion, of educational chaos and materialism, of political confusion and trouble in the governments of the world, all arming to have war and more war, in a society that is bankrupt, in an economic system that is bankrupt, in that kind of a system. And I'm here to bring you the truth. So I ask you to open your ears and to listen, because you don't hear this from any other voice. No one else is telling you the things that God is telling you through me. I wonder how many of you believe what I say tonight. He's speaking through me. He has sent me here to talk to you, to give you his word. You listen, but do you believe it? If Jesus Christ were here, he'd say the same thing. And most of you would not believe him. You wouldn't believe Jesus Christ if he were here. I tell you that because people did not believe him when he was here, and you're no different than they were. Now that's speaking right straight from the shoulder. I've got to tell it to you straight. I'm not going to kid you. I'm not going to deceive you. Satan has been deceiving you long enough. It's time someone opens your eyes to the truth.
It's turned out to be just the most wonderful thing that's ever happened to the work in the Philippines. And we have nothing but positive growth in all areas.
Well, you know what God said to Zerubbabel? Not by your own might nor your own strength, right, but by my Spirit,
and
says
that's very
God.
obvious.
And some people say, well, where do you get your strength? And I just refer them to Isaiah.
Yes.
40th chapter. It's been talking about God and how great he is. And then in verse 29, he giveth power to the faint, and to him that hath no might, he increaseth strength.
Yes.
That's where I get it.
I want to thank you for your time, and it's been very nice talking with you.
I'll try to get back out and see you and have another ministers' meeting, see all the ministers, if you can get them all back into Manila.
Excellent,
again.
excellent. Thank you very much.
Carry
Keep
on.
in touch.
Carry on.
Mr. Armstrong keeps in touch with all areas of the work around the world. When new offices became necessary for the work in England, he visited and approved the leasing of the third floor of a modern office building at Elstree on the outskirts of London. When the move was nearing completion, Mr. Armstrong again visited the office personally to inspect it.
Well, look at us here. Hello there. I'm just asking your son about you. You like our new orders here? I think everybody does.
The spacious new offices provide pleasant working conditions for the staff. Modern business machines combine with traditional courtesy and the desire to help. The English office serves subscribers, co-workers, and members not only from the British Isles, but many parts of Europe and Africa. Regional Director Frank Brown updated Mr. Armstrong on progress in the areas under his supervision.
And this is just a summary of all the operations that are administered from here in the United Kingdom, which includes Scandinavia, Black Africa, and some area in the Mediterranean, which don't have any headquarters offices there, so they're all sort of done through here.
Later, Mr. Armstrong addressed the ministers from the United Kingdom, Ireland, the Netherlands, and Germany.
And the Great Tribulation won't come until after the United States of Europe has been formed. Leaders in Europe are very anxious to have a united Europe and see it get together and restore the old so-called Holy Roman Empire. I know prophecy said it is going to happen. I know it's going to happen in our time, and it's really surprising it hasn't happened before now. I would say, if anything, it is overdue. I believe it is more than possible that God himself has delayed and held it up. He's wanted this work to go to the world, and it has had to go to the world, and I've had to go to the kings of the world. And I have done that.
God's work is reaching people in all parts of the world. Each day, thousands of letters pour into our overseas offices and at Pasadena. Mr. Armstrong needs to know how the viewers and readers are responding to the broadcasts and publications. Mail Processing Coordinator Richard Rice regularly updates Mr. Armstrong on progress in this area.
Now, what have you got?
Well, I have some good news. We have just broken another weekend record in the history of the work. We received 59,000 responses to your latest semi-annual letter. And that's an all-time record for 59? 59,000.
59,000.
That's right. And here's an
That's
update
just
on
in the weekend.
Just for one weekend, that's right. And this is information to give you more details of how the letter is doing.
Good, that's all in good detail.
59,000 letters came into that one
That's what we've got to
semi-annual
continue
response.
doing.
We're getting 100% more questions in the personal correspondence area. People are writing in asking for help regarding marital problems. They have sicknesses of all sorts. They're asking for an anointing clause, and so they're turning to this work and to you as God's apostle for help.
Well, I get that same kind of reports from the ministers out in the field.
Yes, sir.
Again, of ourselves we can do nothing. If we let Christ work in us, he'll do it. And that's why we're going ahead. And I'm certainly glad to see it.
Thank you.
It has always been a publishing work. When the Plain Truth first appeared, it was mimeographed by hand, and only a few dozen copies were needed for the small mailing list. Circulation has now topped 5 million. Now, Mr. Armstrong is backed by several departments and many employees responsible to him for preparing and printing and mailing the millions of magazines and many additional pieces of literature each month. Publishing coordinator Ray Wright reports to Mr. Armstrong on the circulation of The Plain Truth.
Very good. I got some very exciting news for you. We had some phenomenal growth in The Plain Truth this year. The responses since about June of last year have been phenomenal. And the growth is, well, give you an idea here, Mr. Armstrong. We've actually added over 700,000 new subscribers to The Plain Truth since January of this year, which is
700,000.
700,000.
More than 2/3 of a million.
If you think about it, that is already almost the total number we added in all of 1981, and we're only talking about through June. So we got another 6 months to go. So I don't think there'll be any problem of us going to 5 million circulation.
Well, what about the newsstand circulation?
Well, the newsstand circulation right now we're holding at 1.5 million. So when you look at the worldwide circulation, we're talking about 5 million copies of the PT circulated either through subscription or newsstands.
Are the people taking them?
Yes, sir.
Are they getting into the hands of the public?
We think so. We've got 7,000 church members throughout the country that are involved with the local pastors who are the local managers of the program.
But I tell you, one of the important things is the way our own membership are responding and volunteering for that sort of thing. And,
tremendous.
You know, sometimes I feel like getting discouraged. I wonder if our people are as thoroughly converted as they ought to be. And then I find how they respond on things like this.
Right.
I get reports from merchants where we've held Feast of Tabernacles. And they say that they've never met people like our people. That certainly does encourage me. Our people are dedicated, and they are different. They are a changed people. They're different than the people of the world. And the whole difference is something that the world notices and just says, well, that's the kind of people that you enjoy having around.
You know, it's interesting to watch this group grow, because when you think about it, we have 7,000 church members now involved in this program.
7,000.
Today, brethren, you are actually planting the seeds of the truth in many people's minds. You're placing the magazines out on the stand for people to see.
There are more than 14,000 locations distributing The Plain Truth in the United States, and many more in other countries. How does the program work? The newsstand program is made possible by the enthusiasm and energy of members of the church. One of the most successful programs is run by the San Jose, California congregation. 140 local brethren, ranging in age from 8 to 89, contribute their time and talents to distributing over 28,000 magazines each month. By teamwork and cooperation, member participation in the newsstand program saves the work over $1.5 million a year. Since 1976, over 50 million Plain Truths have been distributed from newsstands. In 1982 alone, over 16 million were made available to the public. Since it began, the newsstand program has been responsible for adding more than 900,000 subscribers to the Plain Truths subscription list.
You think about it, there's a scripture in Psalms, I think it's 68:11, which says, "Great was the company of those that published it." Yeah. Now, for the first time in the history of God's work, we got 7,000 church members that are involved in this massive publishing work, getting that gospel out.
I hadn't thought of that.
We are actually reaching 1 out of every 25 households in the United States.
1 out of every 25?
1 out of every 25.
You know, that's amazing. Well, listen, Ray, do you know of any church, any denomination, that has a publishing program like we do.
No, sir.
Like the Plain Truth, the Good News, the Worldwide News, the Correspondence Course, Bible Correspondence Course, Youth 82, soon Youth 83,
yeah.
And all the books and booklets, the side
languages,
weekly report going out to all of our ministers all over the world. Publishing has done more for the growth of this work than any other one thing.
Through the printed word and by radio and television, God works through his apostle to reach this world with the good news of the world tomorrow.
2.5 million is subscribers, except the very fact that
That message is the same as was preached by Jesus Christ and the early apostles. But with the advances in communications technology, the means by which the gospel is preached has been changed drastically.
born again. No, those words that were used.
When Christ's end-time apostle sits down before the cameras in his studio in Pasadena, he has at his fingertips the means to reach millions of people around the world. It is Sunday morning in Los Angeles. The World Tomorrow telecast is being aired across the United States. As Mr. Armstrong announces the special toll-free number, in Pasadena, nearly 100 operators are responding to viewers' requests for the literature and the plain truth. In August, Mr. Armstrong, accompanied by Media Services Director Larry Omasta and Media Liaison David Hume, visited the Wattsline area to see firsthand the response to the World Tomorrow television program.
This year, we're on twice as many stations as we were last year, but the calls have tripled over last year. We were averaging around 2,700 calls a program last year, and now we're averaging around 7,700. And we went up from about 70 stations to over 145. So the work this past year has certainly grown.
When we get even more calls, though, when we're on in New York and
That's right.
Chicago, don't we?
Yes, WOR is our best station. Then WGN is our second best. And probably this morning is our third best station, usually. Those are the three big stations we have.
Oh, I see Channel 11 here.
Yes, sir.
It's third.
Yes, it's third.
What about the news station in New York? It's
fourth.
WNEW.
About fourth.
That's about fourth.
Is it?
Yes.
Yes.
And then fifth would be the other station here in LA in the evening.
It would?
Yes.
Yes.
KHJ.
I see.
Yes.
Yeah. There's such a huge population in all of these places.
After nearly 50 years of broadcasting, Mr. Armstrong knows the importance of selecting the best stations and time slots for the World Tomorrow TV and radio programs. Mr. David Hume reports to Mr. Armstrong on the current situation and to ask his advice on new opportunities as they become available.
This is all of our television coverage to date. Now this breaks it down into the various network affiliations. We're on all the colored ones, and then the dark ones here are where there's cable coverage. Now, not everybody in that area would be able to receive it, but a lot of people, 40-50% of the people, have got cable in their homes. So it's really getting filled in. A lot of this, of course, come in the last year or so.
Where do we stand now on new radio and television stations?
Well, currently, of course, we've had some budgetary constraints, but we are still able to buy a few new stations. And the reason we're able to do that is simply because in the last few weeks and months, we've been able to cut back in some areas where there's a lot of duplication, and we've been able to extend the coverage a little bit further. So by making some economies, we've been able to even go ahead and buy some new stations despite the budgetary situation. This morning, I had an offer from Boise, Idaho.
One more station in a medium-sized American city. But buying time on that station means that 114,000 more people will have the opportunity to hear the end-time warning and the good news from the work of God. God opens the doors, and his apostle and those who are called to support him continue to walk through those doors. They cannot always tell where those doors will lead. In 1982 came the surprising opportunity to begin the telecast for the first time on the European continent, broadcasting to Belgium and northern France. A special version had to be produced, subtitled in French. Response has been as good as the successful English language stations.
Humanity has not admitted it's wrong. Humanity doesn't admit his world is wrong, that he's built a wrong system, a wrong society, wrong education, wrong governments, wrong business structure, wrong social system, wrong everything in our world today. Some voice has to cry out in this religious wilderness of this modern day and tell you people what is happening. And God Almighty tells me, cry aloud and spare not, and show my people their sins, God says. And I'm trying to do it.
What will be next? The possibilities are enormous. Even the sky is no longer the limit. A string of communications satellites ring the Earth 22,300 miles out in space. It is now possible to send a TV signal around the world at the speed of light. God's work has already begun to harness this technology. Brethren on different continents through satellite and microwave transmissions have watched Mr. Armstrong together as he spoke to them during the Feast of Tabernacles. Day by day, the inventive mind of man is solving the last few remaining problems of instant global communication, even as those problems that he cannot seem to solve threaten him with extinction. For the first time, it is possible for a voice to cry out and be heard in all the world. And so God's work will go on, for however many years that remain. And those called to do that work must go on, learning, growing, and overcoming, so that one day they can teach others the things that they have learned, the way that will be the way of life in the world tomorrow.
I'm just thinking how different it is today than it was back in the days of Peter and Paul and the early apostles. They had to go around by foot or on a mule or donkey or a rowboat or a sailboat. Today we not only talk to all of these people, but also all around the world. And at the Feast of Tabernacles, I talk here in Pasadena or wherever I am, it goes up by satellite, and they hear it all over the United States and Canada, Hawaii, and England, and a good share of the world. Well, as fast as finances allow, more and more stations.
Yes, sir.
That's what we want. Because that's the first line, and then we follow it up with our publications, and then with the local ministers. That's God's program.
Right. Big team working together. Yes, sir.
Thanks a lot.
Nice to see you again.
I'm really glad to see it coming along. Now I'm going to get to my typewriter.
brethren, at the end of the 1982 Behind the Work Feast film video were some pretty interesting statistics that maybe some of you have wondered about. I'm going to lift those out and make some graphics of them so we can be sharing that information on regular Sabbath services that we do here on the Facebook Live Sabbath service page each week, and that we do on the YouTube Sabbath service channel each week. And we put it also in an archive on Vimeo. If you want to go back and find the last 8-9 years of our Sabbath services and the last 3 or 4 years of Friday night Bible studies that we've been doing, you can go to our main web page. You can see it on the bottom right side of our lower third over here, cogtv.org. Stands for Church of God Television.org. Now, that's not a church, quote-unquote, group you can join or become a member of. That's just the website for our television ministry. That God has ordained me under the ministry of Jesus Christ, under the training from God's end-time apostle Herbert Armstrong, and under the 6th era, the Philadelphia era of the Church of God that God raised up through his end-time most faithful servant and apostle Herbert Armstrong, who, through whom, or through the works of whom, God himself, as Mr. Armstrong said, did the works. He opened the doors. Mr. Armstrong went through those doors. He said the entire 50 years was a struggle. But it wouldn't have even been successful, he said, if God had not been opening the doors and actually doing the behind-the-scenes work that Mr. Armstrong gave his best shot to with a lot of effort. And like he said, struggle, because the devil works against us, and it's just like people who plant crops. There's a lot of work to farming, especially since Adam and Eve rejected God in the Garden of Eden, decided to follow Satan's voice and go their own way, and then were forced out, driven out of the Garden of Eden, and with the angels with the flaming swords placed there, then they had to go form their own forms of education, government, etc. Laws. Had one of their sons kill one of their other sons, Cain's murdering Abel, and suffering all that. And then following that, we've had wars of groups of people and nations, and then finally in the last century we had the first of 2 rounds of World War, and we're anticipating round 3 of World War, when that 7th king of Revelation 17 verse 10 that we've been talking about during this Feast of Tabernacles ascends out of that bottomless pit. Now, I bring that up even now during the Feast of Tabernacles, brethren, because even though at this point we are more than 500 years, we're approaching 600, approaching 700 years into the millennium, symbolically at this point in the Feast of Tabernacles on this 5th day, FOT5, Feast of Tabernacles, day 5 of the 2020 Feast of Tabernacles. We are approaching 700 years into the millennium as of today. By sunset Friday night, we'll have completed 1,000 years of the millennium, and then, boom, the great white throne judgment, the second resurrection, poof, billions come up out of their graves who were blinded during their lifetimes to the truth. They were subject to Revelation 12 verse 9 that speaks of that old serpent, that great dragon called the devil and Satan, who deceives a few people here and a few people there. Now, if you looked up the verse, or if you know the verse, you know, wait a minute, Stephen Gilbreath. Revelation 12:9 doesn't say the devil deceived a few people here and a few people there. That verse says that devil deceives the whole world. Well, wait a minute. How could one being deceive the whole world? Well, because Adam and Eve were driven out of the Garden of Eden. Angels with flaming swords guarded the way to the tree of life until the Garden of Eden is no longer accessible. That tree of life no longer there to eat that fruit. And man is cut off from God, except for the few, mostly you who are tuned in here. Now, maybe there's some of you just tuned in on a whim, and you say, "Wow, what is this?" Well, you'll eventually know. Either God is beginning to call you now to a small spring harvest, and those of you who understand agriculture will understand what I mean by spring harvest, what God means when He talks about His small spring harvest in the Bible. Agriculture people know the spring harvest is just a small type of what's coming in the big later fall harvest after the crops have grown for the summer. Days and days and days of nurturing the crop and the rains and the sunshine and the growth through summer, so they make a big fall harvest. And that's where most people are coming up. What's pictured by what's coming up this coming Friday night at sunset with the last great day, the 8th day of the feast, but it's a separate feast day actually, even though it's adjoined to the end. Right as the Feast of Tabernacles ends at sunset, boom, the last great day begins, a separate feast. Only one holy day during the Feast of Tabernacles. It's the first day of the Feast of Tabernacles. The rest of the days are feast days, but not holy days. But then at sunset this Friday night, not only is it a regular weekly Sabbath this year, because it just coincidentally happens to overlap the annual and the weekly Sabbath, but it doesn't always work out that way. Many years you'll have your regular weekly Sabbath fall during the days of the Feast of Tabernacles, and that has no consequence to the Feast of Tabernacle days, except to bring out this one point that during the Feast of Tabernacles we will continue to have regular weekly Sabbaths every week. And then 6 days shall you work, get all your work done, and then the Sabbath command continues. You stop, you rest, you convocate, you stop your servile work. You might do a little work for the work of God that day. You might set up chairs, you might be a deacon, you might even be a minister who has to prepare a sermon ahead of time and preach that day, and that's a form of work. God's now, after having rested at recreation time, God says He works on the Sabbath. He's with us, and ministers work on the Sabbath, but it's not servile work. It's not restoration of the mess cleaning up the mess that the devil made after he tried to go up and take over God's throne. And he's going to do that once again, and he's going to stir man up just before Christ's return with the Battle of Armageddon, and then Christ returning and pouring out the 7 last plagues via the 7 vials that the 7th angel brings with him. And then during the first at least 3 generations, as Mr. Armstrong said in the 1985 feast film that we played the last 2 days, we split it up over the last 2 days. Mr. Armstrong pointed out it's going to take at least the first 3 generations of the millennium before we get the mess cleaned up and before men's minds are straightened out and they get used to the no longer having the broadcast of Satan the devil come into the minds of men, but those who live on over into the world tomorrow, into the millennium, will have had their minds affected by the daily, hourly, moment by moment, minute by minute, moment by moment broadcast of the devil while they were alive before Christ returned and before the Day of Atonement, when Christ is pictured putting away the devil into the wilderness, a bottomless pit for 1,000 years, and then releases him for a little season when the last great day comes up Friday night. So watch out. This Sabbath, all hell may break loose. Symbolically, because the devil will have been put away during this Feast of Tabernacles, and hopefully we are experiencing some spiritual effect of that. Let's pray for that. And pray for one another, that this will be a wonderful, great feast. I was able to hear from Dane Host last night. A salute, Dane, to you and Jacob. I really appreciate the way those two men back up this ministry with their prayers, with their loyal tuning in, and their support here. Guys, you don't know how much that encourages me, and has provided a means of getting some of this stuff that was wrecked when we had some people break in here in the middle of the night and try to disrupt us, and God allowed that to happen, maybe to wake me up on a few things. You know, we had to suffer some things in the work. The state tried to take over, put a receiver in on January 3rd, 1979 to try to take over the work and oust Mr. Armstrong as the human leader of it. Thankfully, God intervened, but during several months, weeks and months went by where that deceiver was in the seat of Mr. Armstrong. Now, Mr. Armstrong, with the help of a man who, even though he turned on Mr. Armstrong later in a certain way, was a very, very big help to Mr. Armstrong. And I don't want to discount. I think none of us should discount the big, big, big help that Stanley Rader gave Mr. Herbert Armstrong for years. I remember something that I've never heard Mr. Armstrong mention, but Stan Rader's daughter, Carol, told me one day when she and I I dated her for a little while. She and I were out, or I was over at her home, one or the other, and Carol told me how when her dad first met Mr. Armstrong, it involved a situation where Mr. Armstrong needed help with his accounting. And Mr. Rader had studied accounting. This is before he went to law school. In fact, Mr. Armstrong was so appreciative of the accounting help that Stan Rader gave him that Mr. Armstrong paid for Stan Rader's law school. And then Mr. Rader became the attorney for the church. I mean, that was a dividend. That was a big payoff, because Stan Rader God used Stan Rader in an extremely remarkable way during the attempt by the state of California to take over. Mr. Rader conducted himself with great finesse, great skill, great showing of acuteness with the law, and how the state was wrong, and helped to prove that. And eventually, the courts had to back the state out of that lawsuit. And, that was a big battle, because once government gets in things, government doesn't like to admit it's wrong and uses its authority to just keep trampling on people sometimes. And we still have to respect those in authority over us. And, I was reading about another case where the police shot and killed a man. In fact, the assistant police officer in Alabama shot his next door neighbor after some of the family members ran over and knocked on his door. A sheriff was there. The man had had cancer, and he had had chemo treatment, so his brain was kind of fuzzed, and he was acting irrational. And the family was trying to let the sheriff and the police people know, look, please don't shoot him. Let's just get him some help, while he's acting a little irrational. He's not going to hurt anybody. He doesn't have a weapon. But when they go knock on the neighbor's door because they were afraid the sheriff who was present might shoot the guy, so they summoned their neighbor, who was the assistant police chief. And the assistant police chief comes out, and when the man family was trying to help get protected, when he stepped forward toward the sheriff, unarmed, that neighbor, assistant police chief, shoots their relative, shoots the neighbor, shoots the man 6 or 7 times and kills him. Now that's a big civil lawsuit, because the authorities are letting immunity of police power run havoc. And this is not a racist type issue, because the white assistant police chief shot a white neighbor. So it wasn't like a racist thing involved in this at all. This is a white man shooting another white man, his neighbor. And the neighbor was unarmed. And the very thing the family was trying to help avoid when they knocked on the neighbor's assistant police chief's door, he was the guy that did the damage, the harm. So, we're in a world where some things happen. I bring that up, brethren, because I know some of you have suffered wrongs. I've suffered some during the last year, and God tells us we may have to do that. He tells us to suffer wrongs. Jesus Christ suffered a huge wrong for all of us. He paid the penalty for all of our past sins and for those of the whole world. The world likes to quote John 3:16. Sometimes we don't, when maybe we should. But listen, this feast film today was in large part to be in honor of the work that God was doing through an end-time apostle. And, hey, I've got that scripture, but I believe is the one that Ray Wright from Publishing Department cited while he was talking to Mr. Armstrong. I misunderstood him to say Isaiah, what was it? I thought he said 68, but there aren't 68 chapters in Isaiah. So when I tried to look that up, I found, well, wait a minute, Mr. Wright, unless I misheard you. I'll need to go back and replay that. I'm sure I misheard him. But I found a scripture in Isaiah 62, verse 11. I have it up on the screen here now that seemed to be to say, I think what he was saying, yeah, Isaiah only goes through 66. Interesting that men have divided Isaiah up into 66 chapters. But in this chapter 62 and verse 11, let me see if I can bring that full forward while I'll just read that verse to you, where it mentions how the eternal Lord God has proclaimed unto the end of the world, saying, to the end of the world, say you to the daughter of Zion, behold, your salvation comes, behold, his reward is with him and his work before him. Well, that's probably not the verse Mr. Wright was referring to, but at least this first part of this verse supports something Mr. Armstrong says. He would often say, look, it was God doing the work. I just went through the doors God opened, and I struggled hard to do what God put before me, and God blessed it. Mr. Armstrong did well. You and I are a product, a result of what God has done through Mr. Armstrong. Let's see, do I have any other scriptures that some of them I punched up? Here's one. This one right here is the theme that I've been running the last couple of days, more or less. Let's bring it full forward here from Revelation chapter 10 and verse 11. And he said unto me, you must prophesy again before many peoples and nations and tongues and kings. And this was a verse Mr. Armstrong saw as God began to open up the door, as we saw in the first part of the 1985 Behind the Work Feast film 2 days ago. If you didn't see that, I encourage you, brethren, while this Feast of Tabernacles is going on, go to our archive at cogtv.org and punch the archive video button and look for the feast film from 2 days ago, or even yesterday, because we split 1985 feast film up into 2 sections, and I put scriptures up with it that you won't see in the film by itself, and I make some comments that I think will help you stay awake during that long feast film, especially if you're watching it, by yourself from home and things like that. But in the early part, 2 days ago, what's today? Today is Wednesday, so on Monday, October 5, if you look for October 5 on the archive video page, you'll find the feast film from 1985, and in that, you'll see what we're talking about here. How when Mr. Schnee, Herr Schnee, was looking for some color photographs for the Plain Truth magazine after Herman Hay editor of the Plain Truth magazine, had asked Schnee, can you go find us, we're now going into color production, and can you go find us, we need some color photographs of things around the world that would relate to things we'd be talking about in the Plain Truth magazine, and can you go find us some color photographs? He may have asked others to do that as well, in addition to Schnee, but Schnee responded. He followed through on that request, and he talked to a man who happened to was able to pick up the phone or go over and see the King Leopold. Let's see, was that Norway or Belgium? I think Belgium. And maybe it's Norway, I forget exactly, but King Leopold. And he said, hey, there's people, a magazine interested in your buying your photographs. And eventually the king got back to the man and said, well, tell me more about these people. And so he got from Schnee a copy of the 1966 Plain Truth Envoy, which happened to be one of the biggest envoys the work ever produced. A very impressive envoy, and he took that to the king, and the king said, well, I don't want to just meet Schnee, I want to meet the man behind this. I want to meet Herbert Armstrong. And Mr. Armstrong at first said, well, let me get back to you, Schnee. I'll look into this more. And a week later, Mr. Armstrong got back to Schnee and said, hey, I've got the facts on this, and you can tell the king that I'll accept this invitation to come and visit him. And then that opened the door, especially when you hear Schnee in his own voice explain this during the 1985 Feast film. That opened the door to Mr. Armstrong then being able to see other world leaders. That just was a step in that direction. It just flowed from there from one king, King of Spain, to another King of Jordan, to princes, the King of Thailand, and Queen Sirikut of Thailand, and other kings and princes around the world. And it just, and that G2 was put to worldwide use in fulfilling this prophecy here from Revelation chapter 10 and verse 11. Let's pull it full screen once more. And he said unto me, you must prophesy again before many peoples and nations and tongues and kings. And there's something in that respect that I want to make a comment on, and that is I want to address it to Ray Green in Alabama. A big salute to Ray Green, a really wonderful brother in the church in Alabama. Lives up in St. Clair County, is it? In a most beautiful rural area. Oh, got huge boulder-like rocks. Ray and I used to go sit out on those rocks during a Sabbath and play audio tapes of Mr. Herbert Armstrong speaking as our Sabbath service after the Birmingham congregation of the Church of God under the new administration of Joe Jr. Big salute to Joe, his wife Tammy, but Joe, you took the church apostate following the lead of your father. Sadly, we saw your father in this feast film with Mr. Armstrong. Mr. Armstrong having put a lot of trust in him to stay loyal to the teachings and truths of the church. And yet, he didn't. He did not. And Junior didn't, but Junior's been kind in many ways and respects. And Junior will probably be coming up in the time period that's pictured by the event this coming Friday night. By coming up, I mean coming into the kingdom then. I hope so, because otherwise he's got some big answering to do before Jesus Christ about supporting changes that go in opposition to the truths we were taught through Herbert Armstrong. I don't want to say any more than that on it, but after the church in Birmingham followed the lead to get away from Sabbath keeping, and in the 1st January in 2005, they shut the doors to Sabbath services. And, I had already told them that I'll likely be coming as long as you continue to conduct services on the Sabbath, because I wasn't going to jump ship prematurely. I didn't see God moving the baton to any one of these many banana peeling, vanity plate Church of God groups. You know, and in fact, that even emphasized when my roommate said, "You need to get out of that wacky worldwide." You know, he brought another man over to preach that same thing against me, and I looked at the two of them, and I happened to know, well, wait a minute. One of you's attending one of these banana peeling groups, and another of you's attending another vanity plate, a different vanity plate group than the other guy. And I thought, well, wait a minute. Now you guys have joined up together against me to tell me I ought to leave the new administration worldwide and not attend there anymore. I wasn't a minister then. I was just a lay member, usher in the auditorium at headquarters. And you're telling me I should not be attending there anymore. And I thought, okay, this is really interesting. Now, if you guys had been in the same congregation, or there had only been one congregation, you might have made a point. But as the one brought it up with the other one present, and him saying, "Rah, rah, yeah, you ought to get out of there," I thought, well, now, wait a second. I immediately thought of the situation with the apostle, was it Peter or Paul? Paul or Peter, I forget which one, but he was in a situation where the Pharisees and the Sadducees were together accusing him and trying to get him in trouble with the government, local government authorities. And so, with the whole uproar of the Sadducees and Pharisees having combined together against him, he used some wisdom God gave him. He said, well, look, one group believes in the resurrection and the other group doesn't. So he brings up a question regarding the resurrection, and what does that do? That pits the two of them. They start arguing among one another about the resurrection, whether it's valid or not valid. And during their big argument, the apostle just walks out safely and able to leave while they're fighting one another. That scripture came to mind when one of these guys brought up, "You ought to leave that wacky worldwide." Well, worldwide is just a corporate name that Mr. Armstrong put on the physical assets of the work, and Mr. Armstrong had reminded us. I've covered this many times. If you haven't heard this, you need to go back and hear me explain the details of Mr. Armstrong asking everybody one Sabbath, "How many of you are members of the Worldwide Church of God?" People raise their hands. "Oh, come on, put your hand. If you're a member of the Worldwide Church of God, put your hands up high. Let me see it now." And so those that sheepishly had raised their hands shoved their hands on up high, and some that hadn't raised their hands at all, they look around. They go, "Well, I better get my hand up. Maybe we're leaving for the place of safety, and so I don't want to miss the plane, the eagle's wings. Hey, I'm a member." And Mr. Armstrong took a good look around. He said, "Now, everybody who's got your hands up, put your hands down." He said, "None of you are members of the Worldwide Church of God." I've given you the details of this before and explained how when we were, the same corporation was called the Radio Church of God back in 1956 up until about 66, 67, somewhere in there was a name change, maybe 68, from radio to worldwide. So same principle applies. In 1956, he did the same thing he did in the early 80s when he said, "Everybody put your hands down. None of you are members of Worldwide." He told everybody in 1956, "None of you are members. How many of you are saying you're members of the Radio Church of God?" He told them, "Don't be telling people that." He says, "You're members of the Church of God, a spiritual organism. You're not members of the corporation is a non-member corporation. Radio or Worldwide Church of God is the corporate name. Now, generically, it can kind of refer to the Philadelphia era of the Church of God, also known as the body of Christ. Either way, a spiritual organism. So we've been taught, if you listen to our apostle, we've been taught that we're not members of any organization of men or any denomination of men. So we're not members of the corporate, non-member corporation. We are members of the Church of God, a spiritual organism. We had to put a banana peeling, an adjective, with Church of God for forming a corporation because another organization had already locked up the name Church of God Incorporated before the Philadelphia era came along. And so the name Church of God by itself was all locked up. So, but Mr. Armstrong told us, you know, spiritually speaking, we're members of the Church of God, not that corporate Church of God, but the spiritual organism. And we're not members of the corporate, worldwide, or radio Church of God. Now, I bring that up because here I got these roommates saying, get out of that wacky worldwide. Well, what they were really saying was get out of, you know, quit attending where you've got this new pastor general, this new administration who's preaching against Sabbath keeping. Okay, and so the question is, all right, if I leave, where do I go attend Sabbath services? If I get myself out of there, if I stop attending there, where do I go? If I jump ship, where do I go? And if there were only one place to go, and it might be obvious then, oh, God moved the baton over here. But not a baton, because baton represents changing of eras, and that's every one of the church groups is preaching. We're now in the Laodicean era, contrary to the teaching God gave us through his end-time apostle Herbert Armstrong. And only a doctrine can only be set by an apostle, and the Bible supports the doctrine that Mr. Armstrong gave us, that the Philadelphia era continues and will continue until Jesus Christ returns, and the next era, the Laodicean era, will not commence as an era until after the fifth seal opens up, until after Philadelphia is taken away to a place of nourishment, protection, safety, final training, until after the two witnesses are on the scene, until after the famine of the word, until what else happens during the 1260, the 42 months, the 3.5 years, time and times and half a time. All of that, all of those, there are certain things that happen all within that same 3.5 year period, overlapping, and not different 3.5 year periods, jumping here in this time frame and jumping here in that time frame. No, they all occur during the same 3.5 years. They start to occur when the fifth seal opens up. The two witnesses are given their title and powers. Those claiming to be the two witnesses now, they're just two half-wits. God has not given the title, and he hasn't given the power. When he does give the title, when the two witnesses are on the scene as the two olive branches, but you know, they're alive now. Well, we don't know who they are. They don't even know who they are, and won't until God announces it and has it announced, and they find out, whoa, we got this power. We can take a bottle of water. Actually, they can take a whole body of water. They can tell a whole lake or river or an ocean to be turned into blood, because they'll have the power, Revelation 11, verses 4, 5, and 6, to turn water into blood. And I throw this challenge out. I brought in a big, I've put this challenge out to people before. I brought in a big thing of water this time. This happened to be alkaline, 88, smooth hydrogenated. This is one of those expensive $4 or $5 per gallon bottles of water. You know, when you really need to get yourself healthy, get yourself some alkaline body, and diseases and things can't live in an alkaline atmosphere. Anyway, here's the thing. I got water, nearly a full gallon of water here, and I throw this challenge out to you, couple of half-wits out there claiming to be the two witnesses. Before we sign off today, just put your powers at work and turn this bottle of water to blood. I'm going to sit it down on the floor. We'll check it again before I sign off. We got a few more minutes to go, and we'll see if this turns red. I can tell you, I don't anticipate that happening, but I got it right here beside me. Nobody else can get in this room and change that. It's right down there. I'd sit it up in front of us here, but you know, I'm not trying to pull any. I don't expect that to turn to blood. If it does, I'll be very embarrassed, and you know, that would be like saying, well, those two half-wits out there claiming to be God's two end-time witnesses obviously must have the power, because I'm throwing out the challenge. Those of you that know, I'm calling them up. Say, hey, we got this challenge on a live video stream for you to be able to exercise the power that God says he gives the two end-time witnesses in Revelation 11 verses. I'll read it to you in a moment, in verses 4 and 5, 6. Exercise your power. Show them before that program goes off that, you know, he pulls up that big jug of water and it's turned red blood. Show him, and show everybody that y'all are the real two witnesses. They ain't. The fifth seal hasn't opened up yet, but when it does, here's the powers that the two end-time witnesses will have. I'm in chapter 11, of Revelation, chapter 11, and then we go to verses 6, 4, 5, and 6. These are, starting in verse 4, these are the two olive trees and the two candlesticks standing before the God of the earth. Let me back up to verse 3 would be a good place to start. And I will give power unto my two witnesses, and they shall prophesy 1,260 days, 1,260 days, clothed in sackcloth. I haven't seen these two nuts going around clothed in sackcloth. These are the two olive trees and the two candlesticks standing before the God of the earth. And verse 5, if any man will hurt them, fire proceeds out of their mouth and devours their enemies, and if any man will hurt them, he must in this manner be killed. Now, verse 6, Revelation 11, chapter 11, verse 6. These, referring to these are the two olive branches, my two witnesses. These have power to shut heaven, that it rain not in the days of their prophecy, and have power over waters to turn them to blood, and to smite the earth with all plagues, as often as they will. So there you got it, right there, verse 6 of Revelation 11. These two witnesses have power. From the time they're announced as two witnesses, they have power to, what did it say? How did it read exactly there? They have power over waters to turn waters to blood. All right, so there's the challenge. Call up your two half-wit buddies claiming to be God's two end-time witnesses, and just tell them, hey, fox this Stephen Gilbreath, embarrass him, put him to shame, turn this gallon of water he's holding in his hands in the room there with him, turn it into blood. Because very clearly, the two end-time witnesses will have the power to do that. And I'm saying they don't exist yet. You people that are falling for that bunch of hooey, and you keep attacking those of us who know the truth on this, and you keep repeating that lie over and over and over and over again, as if you're trying to maybe convince yourself, trying to convince others. You're not going to convince me, unless those guys could turn this bottle of water into whiskey. No, blood. All right, I'm having a little bit of fun with it, but it clearly says they have power to turn water to blood anytime they want. Poof. So I'm saying they're not the two witnesses. I'm saying they don't have that power. That proves they're not those two witnesses, and I'm just giving you a challenge. Here's an opportunity. Call them up. Tell them, hey, fox this Stephen Gilbreath guy off. Turn that bottle of water while he's live on the internet stream. Turn it into blood, and shut his mouth. No, you're not going to be able to do it. They don't have that power. They don't exist yet. The fifth seal has not opened yet. That's the truth. Let me rephrase. Mr. Armstrong gave us the truth on it, that the two witnesses don't come on the scene until the fifth seal opens up, until that 1,200, and the Bible backs all that up, that 1,260 days, that time, half a times, 3.5 years, 42 months, all the same time period. And it's a countdown clock to the seventh trumpet of the seventh seal when Jesus Christ returns. All right, we're almost out of time, and I want to sing one more hymn, okay? We were emphasizing the last couple of days how God has been took Mr. Herbert Armstrong, his end-time most faithful servant and apostle, before kings and priests around the world. And even in the last few months before he died in mid-January, January 16, 1986, and in the last few months after the G3 was delivered to him on August 19, 1985, and the few months that followed that, he was overseas for several months, seeing kings, fulfilling this commission that God gave him over and above getting the gospel to the world. And he knew how to properly explain it, and he explained in the 1985 film why he didn't say, oh, you should give your heart to the Lord. how he'd be thrown out on his ear, but he had a way of using terms that explain what's going to happen, where they would at least hear the warning and hear what they needed to hear, the prophecies that they needed to hear that are part of a commission God gave the end-time apostle, through whom God called us to be part of the spring harvest, part of the first resurrection, a most blessed resurrection, who will be ruling and reigning with Christ and his wife during these 1,000 years that this Feast of Tabernacles pictures. Brethren, can we close today by singing a hymn? Let me pull out. We'll go to the screen where we can sing a last hymn today, and we'll sing this one from Psalm 4 as we close up day 5 of the Feast of Tabernacles service from cogtv.org via the Sabbath service page of Facebook Live and the Sabbath service channel of YouTube Live. Page 3 in your purple hymnal. We'll all sing this together. From Psalm 4. Trust in God and stand in awe. Everybody on verse 1. Verse 3, sing out, please. Oh, that we might see some good, and he will say, only look and smile on us, oh, righteous God, has given me more joy than they all know. He alone makes me to dwell safely in peace. All right, brethren, thank you to those of you who sang along with us. Our ending song for this day 5, Feast of Tabernacles, here from cogtv.org, God willing, and the creek don't rise. We'll plan to be back with you tomorrow morning, same time, same station, Facebook Live Sabbath Service page, YouTube Live Sabbath Service channel, in the archive on Vimeo, all via cogtv.org. Just look for the archive video menu tab from cogtv.org. Stands for Church of God Television. Again, not a group you can join, but a television ministry. Brethren, Chag Sameach, happy rest of the feast day number 5. Go out, rejoice, have a great meal this afternoon, and review this, do a watch party or two when you come back, and pray, give some good meditation, and enjoy the rest of day 5 of the Feast of Tabernacles 2020.